topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaxan. I am a core alignment coach, which means I support people in aligning their actions with their values. I'm also an emotional wisdom training specialist, which supports people in recognizing their emotions and taking wisdom from them, not getting stuck in them, not letting them control our decisions and actions, but honoring them and using them wisely, because emotions, I believe, are healing tools we have been born with. And we're not well trained in America and a lot of communities to respect what having emotions means and how to process them so we can think more clearly and act more clearly. I'm also a diversity educator, and if you want to see samples of my classes or trainings that I offer, you can check them out on my website, knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. Today I have two guests, and I'm really honored that they are sharing some of their time. They're incredibly busy. They both have been supporting communities, community development, community belonging, community inclusion, and educating a lot of us and community protection. Today the show is called What is Public Safety? The title was designed by my first guest, Chief of Police Emeritus Calvin Handy. Calvin, please come on in. Thank you for being here again. And some listeners may already know you're a tremendous supporter of the show. You have been on 2 or 3 times sharing your expertise of over 30 years of policing yourself. And I know you have had ascending roles working as a chief of police at 2 different UC campuses, Berkeley, UC Davis, and you have established the Calvin Handy Public Safety Consultants, of which you're the president, and I have at least one article that you've written. So thank you so much for being here. I'm just really grateful.
Thank you, Bahia. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you and Larry as well. It's really, I'm glad that they have this opportunity to speak out.
And let's bring on Larry Lee, who is the publisher and president of the Sacramento Observer, a family newspaper that was established by his parents, Dr. William H. Lee and Kathryn C. Lee. And the Sacramento Observer is an amazing newspaper that gives clear insights and incredible service and community building to not only the Black community, but I have to read. Larry Lee, thank you for being here. I know you're incredibly busy. I can't imagine having to constantly be publishing, and I can't imagine all the deadlines you have.
Well, you do a show every week, so you get a little bit, you have a sense of it. But yes, it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you, and of course, my good friend and confidant, Calvin Handy. He's a wonderful person, so it's happy to be here and share this space with you guys.
Thank you so much.
That's mutual, by the way.
And I'm fortunate Calvin introduced me to you. So I have to read something from the Sacramento Observer website, and there's even more to say about it since this was written, but I just want to let listeners and viewers hear that this was an amazingly fast-growing journalistic effort that has gotten, well, 6 times the Observer has been named the nation's top Black newspaper, symbolized by receiving the John B. Russwurm Trophy, given annually by the National Newspaper Publishers Association. And as of when this was written, it says, in fact, now after nearly 6 decades of service, the Observer has been honored with more than 700 local and national awards for journalism excellence and outstanding community service. So, Larry, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I don't need to. I don't need to add to that. It's I am standing on the shoulders of giants and trying to continue the legacy left by my incredibly amazing parents, and just continue to support and build Sacramento up as best as we can. Make it better than the way we found it.
Well, it looks like you're doing a phenomenal job.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, sorry, Calvin, go ahead.
Just congratulations. That's all.
Thank you. Well, I'll take it since you're giving me the 2 seconds. This is the Observer's 60th anniversary year. So we were founded in November of '62. So we're getting into our 60th anniversary year. We're going to have a big celebration later on this year. So I expect to see folks come on out in their Sunday best, as they'd say, to come celebrate. You'll be there. Sign you up, Calvin. I got you.
Please do.
Yes.
Fantastic. And let's do a show about it if you want.
There you go. Love it.
So, Calvin and I recently spoke about the latest mass witnessed horrific, almost incomprehensible killing of yet another American son. And this time I am referring to Tyre Nichols, who is a native of Sacramento and who was an incredible photographer and looked like just a joyful skateboarder and very, very loved. And we didn't want to start this show without honoring his memory and acknowledging his amazing parents. And I was so happy that the President Biden, honored them last night when he did the State of the Union speech, because it seems sincere and it seems that he has engaged and listened. And I just think that's a huge part of healing. And I just, so many times, I don't think we stop long enough to heal and process tragedies. And so I don't know if each of you wants to add anything before we move into other thoughts.
Larry, did you want to go or?
I'll let you start, and if you've got something in particular, I'll let you start.
Well, you know, I've been around a long time. I'm older than both you guys put together, but I feel that in our society, the taking of a life can come to be seen as something that just happens. And when I think about Tyre Nichols, and I've seen many videos of him skateboarding and doing all that he did in his life, and I thought he was, I think he was a beautiful human being, a beautiful young man. He had the opportunity to have a life and to build and to grow and to be, and for some senseless reason that's essentially unknown to us now, his life was taken from him in a brutal and unacceptable fashion, no matter how you decide that. And here's a man enjoying driving down the street, not harming anyone, not threatening anyone, not wanting to do anything like that, having no history of doing anything like that. And his life is not only taken, but is taken by those who are supposed to be protecting our lives, you know, the public safety realm. And so I just want to say that I also share, Bahia, your observation. It really did a lot of good I think for me personally, for this country and for Sacramento and this region and this world, for his parents to have been invited by the president and the first lady to be a part of the celebration or the activity yesterday. And so I can say that, and I have more to say about this issue generally, but I just wish the very best for his family and his friends and our communities. And I think his parents are right, is that something good will come from this. And I want to be a part of that. I want to see it happen. I want to make sure that it does to the extent that I can with my limited resources. And so it's a very sad moment in our time. And by that, I'm including George Floyd and everyone else, but you know, it's Tyre, and he didn't deserve what befell him by those who did it.
Yeah. I'll just follow that. There's not much more that needs to be said. Like Calvin said, the value of life it's not treated with the amount of value it should be. And whether you're black, white, old, young, you can't look at that altercation and not be hurt by it if you have any sort of soul. And we have to your point, here we have to mourn the loss of a son, a brother, a father, a friend, a young man who looked like he was just bringing light into the world, and is now no longer there. But it's incumbent upon us, like Calvin said, and his mother said, it's incumbent upon the rest of us to make sure that his dying did not happen in vain. And the many others, countless others like him that have lost their life at times when they shouldn't have. And so I know obviously that's what our discussion is going to be about. But for the life of Tyre Nichols, we definitely hold his family in prayer, his friends in prayer, and pray for us as a nation to be better tomorrow than we were today.
Amen.
You're here.
Thank you. So there is so much to say, but let me just repeat the question that you raised, Calvin. And it's just so interesting for someone who's been protecting people for decades that you want to talk about what is public safety. So let's start with hearing what you think it is and what else you want to know from other people and just what you want for public safety.
Right. And I want you both to, like jump in there, as you see fit, as I kind of kick this off a little bit. But for me, when you go through as much as this country has gone through, particularly, I think maybe forever, but particularly since the 70s, as we've seen a more proliferation of firearms and these changes in the rules that allows just about everyone to have a firearm. And I'm not saying that was the key issue in this particular case of Tyre, but we lose something on the average, I believe, of 30,000 people a year, black, white, that doesn't come into play. And so if you will allow me for a moment, I'd like to go back about 200 years ago in England, a guy by the name of Sir Robert Peel, who had served as Prime Minister for England for a couple of years and who was, clearly a leading citizen, wealthy, and all of that. And he got a mission they felt that London, central London, was beginning to diversify. And they had more and more people, more and more density, and normally that leads to more and more crime. So what Sir Robert Peel did was he created the then very famous London Metropolitan Police. They're not quite as famous during these days, but so some of the issues are going on there. But in this program, Sir Robert Peel developed and others developed 9 principles, what he called the principles of law enforcement. And they were the way that they wanted peace officers to behave and to carry themselves and to conduct themselves in their interactions with the community, because in fact, if you were to, the polling from that date would probably remarkably resemble to a great degree the same kind of feeling that people have now, regardless of where the community is, about having police in your community. We want someone to protect us. We want someone to be there for us. We want someone to respect us. We want someone to help us, to be there. You know, all of these things 200 years ago, many of the things that we are enumerating today, 200 years ago, people were in a more homogeneous society were asking for the same things, not overly using force, not disrespecting people, not trying to understand and make the difference in a person's life. And that's a very difficult thing to do, particularly when you were confronted with what I would say, what I would call, just the crime on the fly in that situation. So let me give you an example of what I mean by how this might work if you were to bring it into today's world. So you both are familiar with the Berkeley Police Department, not the UC Berkeley, but the City of Berkeley's Police Department. So about right after the time that George Floyd was murdered, I decided to look like what are police departments all over doing, and I thought, let me just start right here where I kind of grew up and worked as a peace officer, and that was in the City of Berkeley. So at that time, when I was looking, the City of Berkeley had its last shooting in 18 years. Okay, and that shooting didn't lead to a death, and then the shooting before that was 12 years. So that's a large number of a very dense city, a location that you expect to have a certain, when you more density, you can often have associated criminal activity. But this is a police officer the police department, I should say, that has not chosen or saw a need to really shoot anybody over huge amounts of time. So in that scenario, how can they do that? And what do we learn from it? And so I don't want to keep commanding the floor here, but I just wanted to point that out as I point to the issue of the principles of law enforcement, which is what Sir Robert Peel developed and put out there. And to me, it's the missing link in what's going on today in terms of reform. We hear reform issues and what's that one? Something the police. What's they say? I can't think of it. Something like refund the police or defund the police.
Defund the police.
And lots of issues like that. Some of them good issues about mental health and that kind of thing. But yet here we are 200 years after a way that people can say we can live with the police department by giving someone lots of authority and giving them deadly force and then turning them loose among us. We want that to be someone that can trust us and love us and be with us and help us and do all of that because that's what they want to do. What's the key? And I'll close it down for a minute. But the key for me as a police chief and hiring anyone was to trying to determine to my very best ability that I was about to hire someone in a role like this, because the number one criteria for me is that they have to want to serve people. That's what it's about. It's not about I need a job or I need to buy a car. This is about serving people and taking care of people. So when I look for that thing that says, I'm here because I want to help the people in my community or in a community. And that's I think it's the missing link, is that I connect the Peel principles to this because I think it plays out that way simply because, as I've said repeatedly, in this 200-year cycle since this idea of the principles were created, we still haven't arrived there. And I don't want to be to misstate this. There are many law enforcement or peace officer authorities in this country who do adhere to Peel's principle and who do believe in an ethical orientation. And when we think about all of the methodologies and different approaches to take out there in terms of how do we have a safer community. We just don't feel as though we need to go to the principles, to the foundation of what this whole profession is supposed to be about. So public safety is the protection of the general public, right? So let me just stop there and give you guys a chance to react to the little bit I'm saying, but I'm just coming from something that's very near and dear to my heart. I have been in a lot of situations on the streets myself, and I find that most of the time, if we can respect and especially take as much spin as you can off of violence and heavy-handedness and that kind of thing, and just be honest and open about it. I think we can make some progress, but we serve the people, and the alliance of the people of the police is not to the mayor or the governor. I'm sorry, guys, the president or anyone else. It's to the people that they serve. That's who we work for, and so I've tried to do that, to live and to have and steer my career in that way, and become a proponent of community policing. And I will always feel that until I'm no longer able to feel, because that is, I think, the way to keep our society and to deal with the issues where we can. And not everything police can solve, but where we can. So I know that was a jumble, but I'd like to hear. It's when you hear, and I'll use the African American community, when you hear people talking about issues with the policing, you rarely hear them as a large group saying, "Oh, we don't want the police." They want the protection. They want to know that there's someone there that's looking after them if that's what they're going to get. And if that's not what they're going to get, then we need to get back onto the figuring out what this problem is. And out of all the reform stuff that I've seen, and I've seen a lot of it, and some of it's good, and some of it's just that's not going to happen. But I think for me, you've got to have a way to develop within peace officers just that they're peace officers. Now, I'm not saying that there are dangerous situations out there. You got to be careful and all of that. But if they can do it in Berkeley, then we can do it anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Thank you, Calvin.
So.
Well, I think so. You said a lot, and you really hit the nail on the head that I wanted to make sure and bring up was, as you said, the role is supposed to be for peace officers, and it is a public service position. I think
It is.
I think we've always, at least I've always looked at policing as a noble type of profession. Similarly to my uncle was the city's first Black fire chief, similar to firefighters. If you're called to that, there's a certain type of way in which you should operate, and you're going into that position knowing that. I know that there's always kind of the current term that's used a lot within law enforcement is to make sure that the officer gets home safely. And there's a lot of, it seems like that has been said more in more recent years than what I heard in years before, because it's like, the onus is on making sure the officer gets home safely. And we want officers to get home safely.
Mm-hmm.
But similarly to firefighters, we want firefighters to get home safely. But when they run into a burning building, they're not thinking about getting home safely. They're thinking about how to serve the people that might be in that burning building, or keep that burning building from burning up other things, and controlling that fire. And so their personal risk is not weighed with any sort of measure compared to the public risk. And I think that when we talk about policing, that doesn't to me, that doesn't happen. It seems like now it's more important for the officer to control the situation, You know, you can't go. I don't even want to say you can't go a day. You can't go 3 hours without hearing about a new police officer involved shooting.
Mm.
You can't. It just. I mean, I consume a lot of news, obviously, but
Yeah.
you know, every few hours there is a officer involved shooting where the suspect, you know, ends up dead or, you know, close to dead, you know, and the officer gets home safely, but the public does not.
Mm.
And I don't. I just can't imagine being in that position, in that called to that position. And Calvin, obviously, you're on the front lines, but you know, I always heard for many years, officers said, I worked 40 years in law enforcement and I never pulled my gun. You know, I heard that ad nauseum for,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for decades, but that's not the case now. So back to the earlier point we said about, you know, human life is not treated with the same amount of value. And it's disappointing. I think to your other point, Calvin, about was it Pete? Was that his last name? Who did the policing in London?
Peel, Sir Robert
Peel, Sir Robert
Yeah.
Peel. I'm sorry. You know, I think the if you want to get to a root of a problem in this nation, for me, from our perspective, this country has a problem with violence, and it has to atone for its roots. You know, many people stand on, you know, the rights of gun owners, and, you know, the importance of, you know, liberties and patriotism. They use all these, you know, these code words and trigger words about,
Mm-hmm.
you know, going back to the founding of this nation. And there's a lot of, you're never going to hear me say anything negative about this country, as far as it is an amazing country, but it has issues. You can have both, can be true.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, when we talk about, you know, the founding of this country, it's based on so much violence. I know there's violence around the world, and I'm not naive enough to think that you can't, you know, create a country like the United States without having some sort of violence. But, you know, there's an atonement that's needed by this country. You know, when you talk about, you know, the conditions of slavery, and I know when we talk about policing, you say, you know, well, policing in other countries is so much different than it is in the United States. And that is true. And I think it's because so much of this nation's DNA is based on violence and slavery and exploitation, and without atoning. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that we can change history, but we have to atone for it. If you are in an abusive relationship, the abuser and the person abused can't just forget what happened and say, let's go on, you know, an anniversary celebration as a couple. The abuser has to atone. The abuser has to make amends, because otherwise the relationship is never going to be a healthy one. And this country does not have a healthy relationship between those that have oppressed and the oppressors and those that have been oppressed in this country. And you know, I know we can't solve it on this show, but it is a conversation that I think has to happen. And I'm the first one to say, you know, okay, yeah, I understand you individual didn't have anything to do with the enslavement of my ancestors, but you are the beneficiary of that, and not just monetarily. You're the beneficiary emotionally. You're the beneficiary through perspectives and opportunities, and just just the ability to pursue the right to pursue a healthy and happy life. And this country has to make amends for the various atrocities that have happened. And every generation that we get a little further away from, I think anytime we get a generation further away from the ability to touch slavery, it becomes harder and harder to address what has happened. And I'm just using slavery. I mean, there's obviously this country has been has had its problems with obviously the Native Americans in this country. It's had problems with Asians in this country. So there's we're not alone, but we're a big one. Because it is part of what has allowed the country to have great wealth and great abundance and position and statue in this country. But it's just it's never atoned, and it needs to.
I absolutely agree 1000%, and I feel that that's why I really think it's so important to mourn and grieve, and that a huge block, some unconscious, some obviously very intentionally conscious, of moving forward and actually creating inclusion and trying to create equity in all kinds of arenas is this whether you want to call it denial, white guilt, shame. If I'm someone who has benefited from the system, it just blocks people from being able to actually be really helpful to move things forward. And then to think about, and absolutely, and I believe the police in this country started as a job was to go and capture people who had escaped from slavery. Right. So if you think about the roots of our police force being catching people who escaped, that means catching Black people, catching dark people, catching brown people, and by white people. And it's incredible how that is, it does feel, if you can call it the DNA of our country, it's there. And it's there, like, it's relatively new, I think, to be talking about generational trauma when you belong to people who have had experienced trauma over and over and over and passed down. And the traumas don't stop, they just change. Though some things get better, of course, we've all acknowledged that. But, absolutely. And also, as someone who works, which I try to use my privilege as much as possible to help other people with privilege to recognize when and where we can use our witnessing and our, whatever you want to call it, advantages, where we have, like you were saying, Larry, access to networks or resources, or I'm starting to look at the generational DNA of the oppressors, right? The other side of it. And everybody needs healing, whether you're an agent, whether you were trained to be an agent of oppression or oppressed. We all need tremendous healing to get clarity. And to think about, like, I so appreciate you talking about the history, because again, it's not about shaming or blaming, it's just pointing to our reality and how we can move forward. Yeah. And to think about I'm just going to say ridiculous efforts of the Florida governor, for example, and any other places banning books that were bringing in stories from voices that have been marginalized and starting to include the history of people whose history was not acknowledged and put into like textbooks for one thing, or novels, or it's just an absurd and painful and hurtful step backwards, not just for the people who've been targeted by oppression, but for all of us to like, would I want my children to be ignorant? Do I want my children to not know your history? To know about Calvin's family's history, Larry Lee's history, the Sacramento Bee's history? It's just incredibly remediable. Like, we can do something about this. We don't have to stay stuck.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you see that on that last note there. That's why I think, and I know that the world moves far beyond just in terms of what the policing is doing, but to think that let me just read this. This is, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, this won't take long. I'll read one or two of the principles because they are important. And principle number 4. The degree, this is on Peel's principles, the degree of cooperation of the public that can be secured diminishes proportionately with the necessity for the use of physical force and compulsion in achieving police objectives. I mean, that's 200 years ago that kind of enlightenment was out there. Now, I absolutely agree that with what you said, that in this country, our first kind of policing that we put together was all about slave patrols. But so I'm not using this country, even though after slavery, in New York, for example, they tried to, after the turn of the century, they tried this whole notion of policing of the principles, and it's just not been able to stick. But let me just read one more, because I think I'm just trying to give some sense of the how this works. Number 5, the police seek and preserve public favor, not by catering to public opinion, but by constantly demonstrating absolutely impartial service to the law, in complete independence of policy and without regard to justice or the injustice of the substance of individual laws, by ready offering of individual service and friendship to all members of the society without regard to their race or social standing, by ready exercise of courtesy and friendly good humor, and by offering of individuals to sacrifice and protecting and preserving life. So that's 200 years ago that these ideas existed in a formal setting. I'm not speaking to the relative efficacy of it 200 years later and all of that, but for me, in this kind of profession, and in our society that is, I mean, Larry, you started this ball rolling, and I think the idea of the importance of greed and power in what happens in a lot of this country, or it seems that way to me, it needs to be observed, and is being observed, and it's hard to understand what to do about it. But in terms of the issue of people who have lots of authority in their badge and deadly force on their hips, and we're going to have those folks out there in the public safety situation looking after us. I won't say that they're universal, but we have serious problems. When I was a young officer, I used to tell my fellow officers, I have a home, I have 2 children, I have a spouse. I said, so don't do anything wrong in front of me, because I'm going to give you up, because I'm not going to sacrifice my family or anything else because you wanted to do something wrong. Now, I may have done that in a little bit of joking, but I wasn't, because I saw myself as someone who had an opportunity to help folks. I never, in all of my life up until I became a peace officer in the Air Force, I never pursued that or had anyone in my family pursue it. But once I found myself there, and I found that I was a person that I really enjoyed being of service to people. It took me a while to get there, but I found that. And so as our society, and we have so much documentation of how much we want to do for each other and do for people and do for the country and do for the world, but yet um, there's a lot of, um, I think, either mistakes or purposeful changing of what the facts really are. And what they are right now is that I don't think that there's going to be any one person that's going to come along in this era and jump up and say, okay, I'm Abraham Lincoln and I'm going to change all these things. That's not going to happen. Now we're at the point where I personally believe where our society, the people who want to live here, the people who are trying to live their lives every day and be a good neighbor and to be a good friend and to deal with their issues, I think we are the ones who are going to have to make the change. And we must be able to use the word and mean it, love. Love thy neighbor, love thy friend, love thy family. We can't get enough love. And so I firmly believe that. I've always tried to, I'm not perfect, don't get me wrong, but I've always believed that, and I always will. And I think as much of orientation for love that we can have, the better off I think we will be as a country and as a world.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with absolutely everything that Calvin said. I think the challenge will be overcoming those obstacles that are that are realistically in the way. And I think I do want to. You mentioned something earlier, and I want to make sure I kind of bring it up a little bit, because you talked about kind of. And it was, you say whatever you want to say about the term, but the idea of defunding the police, I think, is at its root is based on what's being done right now cannot continue.
Yeah.
To your point of it's going to take the people to kind of change it. So when people, I think, call for defunding of the police, we see billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars that go to law enforcement agencies, and you turn around and more and more officers are getting hired, equipment is getting purchased, tanks and other military grade machinery is coming into their disposal, again at the expense of taxpayers. And so when people talk about defunding the police, there's some realness there. And I know it's not a popular term, because to your point, Calvin, people want law. I'm not going to use the word terms law and order like our President number 45 would use it. But when people, obviously we are a nation of laws, and we the world is based on laws, and biblically it tells us we've got to follow laws. So I understand the need for following laws, and we need people to help enforce those laws and keep people safe. Back to the idea of peace officers, but everything doesn't require a military response. It just doesn't. And so, and law enforcement agencies are easy. It's easy for them to justify why they need more money. I'll go back to something else. The violence is in this country's DNA. There have been guns for centuries, but never like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are too many guns on the street.
Absolutely.
And law enforcement agencies can say they're fearing for their lives because they feel like everybody has a gun. And in some instances, everyone does have a gun. But in some instances, like Calvin said, the need for de-escalation or for cooler heads to prevail doesn't seem to enter into anything. And so again, everything just comes so violently. And like I said, like with the military response. So when communities that are over-policed, and communities are over-policed,
yes, they are.
I've you know, I'm from Sacramento, born and raised. You know, spent most of my youthful years in Oak Park. Oak Park is a neighborhood in Sacramento that you could be detained by law enforcement, by 4 or 5 different law enforcements. You can be detained by Sac PD. You can be detained by Sac Sheriff. You can be detained by UC Davis Police. You can be detained by UOP Police. You can be detained by CHP, all in the neighborhood of Oak Park.
Wow.
Just because of, you know, the jurisdictions that fall in that region, in that area. And none of them, there is no consistent anything from one agency to the next. You know, I very clearly remember being about 10 years old, first time in my life being held at gunpoint by UOP police because they thought I looked like somebody who stole something.
I'm sorry.
Right there in the alley next to the Guild Theater when I was about 10 years old. You know, and so policing is something that is, for some people, as I said, those that have been over policed, for some people, it is a, you know, it is a force that is, you know, holding them hostage. And why should I, as a taxpayer, pay for something that is denying me my freedoms, my ability to walk down the street, my ability to try and get home, you know, my ability to, you know, get something from, you know, the liquor store, you know, which, you know, it shouldn't be, I wish there wasn't a liquor store in my neighborhood, but if I got to go get something, if I got to go get cigarettes, if I got to go get something, I got to go to the liquor store. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the notion and the idea of reimagining or redirecting those resources to areas that can be healthy for our communities is not so obscure. Yeah. And it has to be treated with the amount of, because it's coming from a very real place. People don't want to, you know, we broke a story, you know, in 2020 when the Sacramento County, you know, was misusing and abusing its COVID relief dollars that was supposed to go to, you know, helping the community get healthy during COVID. And they were backfilling their law enforcement budget because they were, you know, they were struggling with that. And so, you know, in order to kind of fill their law enforcement budget, they were using this money that was supposed to be for the people and using it for, you know, to backfill their budget and to, you know, keep, you know, salaries at the level that they need to, and you know, keep bringing dollars into the sheriff's department. And so, you know, these things have to be, we need somebody to really step up and really be an advocate. That's not necessarily just from the voices of the people, but, you know, from those that are within the system. I'll shut up.
Thank you so much. I cannot believe we are out of time. We are actually out of time.
Sorry.
So let's continue this conversation. Thank you both immensely. There's so much more to say and share and discuss. Calvin gave me an incredible article, Police Shootings Do All Lives Matter, which I think everyone should read. But let me say, Calvin will be hosting the show next week. The conversation will continue with other guests. Larry, you're always welcome to come back. And I now need to.
whenever you need me to.
Thank you, both of you, Calvin Handy, Larry Lee. Thank you, listeners, viewers. Thank you to our engineer, DJ, our producer, Dean Piper. And may we all have enriching conversations next week. And please tune in 8 p.m. Eastern Time to Talk 4 TV, or W4CY Radio for It's Your Voice. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for having me.
Everything Larry said.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. inarticulate speech